If I were asked to mention something positive about this pandemic that we are suffering, is the fact that all my kids went from college back into the house. So me, my wife, and all of us are studying, working from home. So we put a big burden on the internet. So they were complaining about how slow it was. First investment, and this is what this video is all about. It's about giving you tips on how you find bottlenecks and where you spend the money in order to improve the performance without compromising the security. As you know, in my house I have not just one Wi-Fi but actually two. One is where all the unsecure devices, the IoT devices, the printers, the stuff that may or may not get updated, and I don't care that much if they or when they will be hacked by somebody else. So I consider this area in here insecure. And then the one where I have the devices I care about, where is that I tell my folks at home to connect their network to. So what I also, if you follow my videos, you know that I also have a QRadar inside at home. It can be the free QRadar CE or any other license that you may have, in which I send logs, flows, proxy, and I've been doing VPN stuff, and I've been experimenting with Suricata for IPSs, you know, and all that is by virtue of the pfSense router sending all that information into QRadar, so I can monitor what's actually going on in the house and learn a ton of things and practice a lot of stuff about computer security here at home. But now, so the first option was, okay, double the ISP speed that they provided me, and I did that, but the family was not seeing the benefit of it. They were still complaining about it, saying, Dad, what is actually going on? And being the IT head here for support, I'd say, well, let me actually do the right testing to determine what are the bottlenecks in order to do the next investment. And I follow a bunch of tricks that I learned from my very good friend Leopoldo Aguirre, also known as Polo. So what is my testing tool? Well, my testing tool is simply a laptop that I can move around the house, and you'll see why later, with an Ethernet cable, not Wi-Fi. In fact, Wi-Fi should be turned off. We want to make sure the best performance and nothing beats the performance of a good cable. So first question is, am I getting the speed from the ISP that I'm paying for? Well, that's easy to check. All I did is I took the end of this cable, unplugged my pfSense router from the modem, and I connected my computer there. Sure enough, got an IP from the DHCP from the ISP provider, connected to the internet, run a speed test, and I was getting even a little better than the performance that the ISP was selling me. So the problem is not there. That aspect of it is actually good. Now, the next obvious test is to put the Ethernet cable, plug this back on, and then put my testing device, my laptop, at this port on OPT on the secure network, and at this port. And on both, when I ran the test, I was getting less performance than the one I was getting before the router. So the obvious culprit is the router. Now, what it is that all these additional logs that I'm sending into QRadar is too much for my little SG1100, that very inexpensive small router that I recommended in the previous videos that has served us so well. Well, that was part of the problem, and the way you determine that is you go into your pfSense configuration under services, and then you go and remove some of these services and then repeat the test. And sure enough, that was part of the problem. Particularly Suricata is very heavy. But then, okay, one option is to upgrade, which I actually eventually did, the SG1100 to an SG3100. which has more CPU, more memory, so it has better performance. So that put me to a point where when I measure back here, I was seeing the very same performance I was seeing here. That's good, and I still kept monitoring my network at home with my Curita, so life is actually good. The problem happened when I moved into the Wi-Fi because, of course, family wasn't happy. When I was doing the testing on the Wi-Fi on both of them, the difference in performance was actually significant. More so in my old traditional router that I use as a bridge here. This is I think it's called Time Capsule Apple. It's an old router that I have from Apple, where that was the original network in the house, where all the devices were actually connected, and I left it like that. But obviously, this device was showing its age, and the performance wasn't as good as this one on OPT. So I knew that this device was due for an upgrade. When I searched for devices for access point, obviously you are not going to find an access point. What people sell you are routers. How do I convert a router into, basically do not use the router feature but only use the router as a Wi-Fi access point? Well, there's a very simple trick. So most routers, regardless of the brand of them, they have basically at least two ports. One is the one port, and typically that's a yellow type of socket. That is the one that you connect to obviously to the ISP, because they sell it to you to be used over here. And then one or more LAN ports, right? And this is basically a switch where you connect your devices physically. Now, what you need to do, if this is a new device, you need to configure it as if you were using it to connect it right here at the ISP, actually over here after the modem. And once you've done that and the stuff is actually working, you need to do two things to make it work as an access point in combination with the scheme here that we recommend with monitoring your network at home. One thing is that you need to disable DHCP. Why? Well, because when I will be looking at my logs and flows and everything in QReader, I want every one of the IPs that any one of these IoT devices will have to be unique. If I allow the router to work as a NAT, which they work by default, then the only IP that I will see here in the logs will be the IP of the router, and that's not what I want. So basically, in another way, you need to configure that as a bridge, not as a NAT, right? So you don't want that to be NAT. So that's what you disable the DHCP, and then you move the cable. Instead of connecting it here, you connected it into the switch, and then this thing becomes an access point. So one thing that you may have a problem with is when you are configuring this router to become an access point, it forces you to get an IP address. You need to define that, particularly when you disable, typically it's in the same place where you disable the DHCP. So there might be a conflict with the IP address that you give to it and the range of IP addresses that will be automatically allocated by your pfSense router. Well, the way you deal with that is very simple, and that's one of the beauties of pfSense. It's highly configurable. I'm here on their services, the DHCP server LAN, and notice that what I decided for that LAN, which is the 192.168.1 network, is that the IP address will start from 10, not from 1, until 245. That's plenty of for my IoTs. So that in that way, if I give to this particular router, let's say 192.168.1.3, then I know that that address will never conflict with the ones from the DHCP, because the DHCP server at pfSense will not be assigning those IP addresses. So once this device becomes this, then obviously again you put your test probe here on the switch, on any one of the empty port of the switch. You do your internet performance, and if you are getting the full speed, now you know that everything is fine. What is left is to test the performance of the Wi-Fi, and there you need to basically now enable the Wi-Fi on your laptop that you move around, and then go around and test. Start by doing the test very close to where the Wi-Fi, and test the 2.4 gigahertz band and the 5 gigahertz band, right? And determine which of the ones are, very unlikely that you will get in the 2.4 similar performance than the one that you get when you're connected to the LAN. You get a bit haircut by doing so. Not so much on the 5G, but that's something that you need to experiment. You need to see what's the type of frequency exists in your house, and then that may lead you to reconfigure some of your IoT devices and put them on this network and that network. Maybe you may want to put your IoT cameras into this faster internet if the speed is good enough. So you move to where the camera is and perform your test. Well, I hope that these short tips I'm sharing what actually I did to improve the networking at home, and get your family together and happily working in the air. And if not happily, at least not complaining to IT Daddy about the performance of the internet.